begin on a very important Thursday afternoon where we will continue as we did yesterday in Birmingham, Alabama, where the eyes of the nation are on Rickwood Field, the oldest ballpark in the country. The significance so large, but even larger this week with the passing of Willie Mays. Remember yesterday we talked to Mayor Randall Woodfin. We head back to Birmingham today, just hours before the game between the Giants and the Cardinals, and Clinton Yates joins us. Clinton, good afternoon. First of all, appreciate the time and really eager to hear about what has been going on today in Birmingham. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Paul. No problem. It has been an interesting week in Birmingham. I am not from Alabama, but I have been to Alabama plenty of times. I've been to this city for various reasons over the course of the years, and this is unlike anything I've ever seen in terms of what you exactly said. The spotlight being put on this town and why is a fascinating. Over the course of this week, the various things that were planned in terms of the entire timeline of this, when the Negro League records were integrated into the real records, so to speak, and I say real in air quotes there, when this was announced that it was going to happen, the game, and all of the stuff around it, it's just been very heavy. And when you throw in to that the death of Willie Howard Mays Jr., it almost moves to a level of surreal. I was in the ballpark when that news was first broken, and to be standing in something called Willie Mays Pavilion, where there's a television with MLB Network on it, playing a reel of his life and highlights at the same time that it's being announced on the screen at the park where his professional debut was. I've seen a lot of stuff in this business, Paul. I'd never seen anything like that, and I didn't know that I knew how to feel at the time, at the moment. Anybody who was in that park that night is never going to forget it.
Glenn, I hate to ask such a prosaic question like what exactly happened, but I would like you to share with us, if you could expound. You're watching the game, you're watching the surroundings, and all of a sudden the news broke.
So I'm sitting in the press box, and if you've been to that field, it's sort of an auxiliary press box situation because, you know, the small box, the real box, is a bandbox. Sidebar fun fact, they have a gazebo press box on the roof, which is actually one of the cool features about Rickwood. That's a different matter, just for people who happen to be building enthusiasts like about the building. Sitting basically in left field, right past the foul pole at third base, and a buddy of mine, Andrew Golden from the Washington Post, taps me on the back and he says, "Yates, turn around." And he just shows me a tweet, and it's from the Giants. And I immediately got up and vacated my seat because I just had a rush of emotion. Why did I have a rush of emotion? Well, because the night before I had dinner with Michael Mays, Willie Mays' son, and we spent a lot of time talking about various things. They had a screening of the HBO documentary about Willie at the historic Carver Theater, which is, of course, home of the Alabama Jazz Hall of Fame. There was a Q&A afterwards with the director of that movie, and they told stories. We sort of continued that conversation as friends and as, you know, new associates afterwards privately, and some of that I ended up writing about. But that literally was what happened the night before for me personally. So when that news hit, I just thought immediately of Michael, and I just had to leave the space. And I got up, walked around a little bit. I might have punched a wall out of frustration because that's just what I was feeling in that moment. And I ran into my friend Jackson Newsmith, who's an associate producer at Uninterrupted, LeBron James' production arm, and for probably 3 whole minutes, just period. Because, again, Willie was 93. It wasn't completely out of the question that obviously this was something that was going to be we're going to have to deal with, but he wasn't there for a reason, and those reasons we can get into later, but it happened. It happened while we were there. It happened while the teams on the field, the Montgomery Biscuits and the Birmingham Barons, were wearing Negro League uniforms, and it was just too much. You couldn't have written that, and you wouldn't have wanted to write that if you were a Hollywood producer, but it was very real, and it was very much what was happening to me.
And I know so much focus, Clinton, is on Willie Mays, and that is justifiable, but I want to expound it a little bit to the Negro League, which is also being honored. And you mentioned some of the records a few weeks ago. That was certainly, I'm sure, part of the overall narrative, but just the importance of what those gentlemen did so many years ago and really were mostly ignored by the mainstream world. Yeah,
and Paul, I got to say, you know, as somebody that does this job, the jobs that we do, there's a large part of it that has to do with the kind of takery and the arguments. But for me, this is a history lesson. This is almost in some ways a science project in terms of not just recognizing what the guys did as players, but how they found this information and how they were able to find a way to catalog all of it and to verify all of it and make sure that any of it made sense well before we started arguing about who had talent and what didn't. I think of a guy named Larry Lester, longtime, lifelong, basically historian who was on the committee that figured out how they were going to do this starting back in the year 2000, Paul. A lot of people don't understand that MLB commissioned this work starting over 20 years ago, and they finally got to where they got. I was with Larry Lester yesterday in the Southern Negro League Museum, and he was emotional. He said, I just can't believe that it's finally happening. We're talking about a kid that grew up in KC around the corner from the ballpark there and would sit in the living rooms. Buck O'Neill's wife was his grade school teacher. Satchel Paige's kids were his friends. This is a guy that dedicated his life to getting, finding, and documenting and cataloging this information. So for a guy like him to see all of this coming together, it's really something. The baseball is one thing. The humans are another. And this at this stage, particularly after Willie's passing, because sure, we can all watch the highlights, so to speak, but you can't relive the lives. And that's something that we still have people that can tell those stories. And I just cherish it every single time I get an opportunity to come across somebody who's willing to do it.
Clinton, finally, and there's no way to chisel tonight down because there's so much that it means and the resonance, but just the significance of a Major League Baseball game being played in this ballpark, on this stage with the Giants. It is in many ways surreal. I know the game hasn't started yet, but just put it into perspective for us.
I think what I hope I get out of this is that for people who are somewhat casual baseball fans, people who don't necessarily care about who's leading the AL Central or whatever, can look at this as a lesson and a window into a portion of America that a lot of people don't know. You're on the SEC network. You've been on the air in the South for a long time, and that community probably has a pretty good idea, but I've been riding cabs around town here for a week or so, and there's a lot of people that were like, how about that? Didn't know. Bull Connor used to call games, as well as the guy who was the, air quotes, public safety person of record in Birmingham, who is responsible for all of the terrible images you've seen. I really hope this serves as a window to the past, as a way to avoid it in the future in terms of what we learn, not just as sports fans, not just as baseball fans, but, Paul, frankly, as Americans.